Okay, good vach. Today was the 80th yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and I'm going to share with you a few stories about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak and also a story of the Baal Shem Tov. The anniversary of the passing of a tzaddik is significant not only for the tzaddik himself, but for all the Jewish people. It says in Tanya that on the day of the anniversary of the tzaddik's soul ascends to a higher place, and all the things the tzaddik did throughout his lifetime, they all ascend on the anniversary of his passing to a new place, to new heights. And from that new place where the tzaddik reaches on the day of his passing, he channels salvation in the language of Tanya, Bekerev ha'aretz, within the earth. But the words Bekerev ha'aretz don't just mean within the physical world. The words Bekerev ha'aretz in the Torah are referring to Egypt. In other words, they're referring to the place of exile, the place of slavery, the place of hardship, that the salvation that tzaddik channels is in the lowest of places, in places which seem to be completely the opposite of godliness and holiness. And yet, on the verse that tzaddik is passing, there's salvation, the salvation that is brought down all the way into the lowest of places. So it's a day when Hashem blesses every Jew, and especially Jews which need it the most, like our brothers and sisters who are in captivity. Levi Yitzchak said about the number 80, that 80 is associated with a verse, Shmeina Pelagshim. It says in the Song of Songs, King Solomon spoke about 80 concubines. And the Talmud explains that 80 concubines refers to the Brises, refers to a certain section of the Talmud. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said that the number 80 is spelled with two mems, mem and mem. Mem is equal to 40. And there are two kinds of mem. There's an open mem and there's a closed mem. The open mem represents that which is open and clear, and the closed mem represents that which is hidden. So the number 80 is about the convergence of that which is hidden to be revealed, that which was before not known to be known. This is something which throughout Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's teachings in his life, you could see this idea of things which are hidden and concealed, and yet they become to the fore and they're revealed. And he reveals secrets about his life and Torah in a way that's really like mind-boggling. So there was one informer for the NKVD that would frequent the synagogue of Rabbi Yitzchak. And in those days, unfortunately, there were many religious people that were informers for the KGB. You can't imagine someone who kept Shabbos, keeps kosher, would do this, but that's what they did, because the KGB would walk over to a person and say, if you don't tell us who's going to shul, you don't tell us who's keeping kosher, don't tell us who's keeping Shabbos, we will put you in prison, and you're going to be and so people, we can't imagine the challenge they had, but that's the reality. The reality is, if you went to shul, you're putting yourself in danger, because there are people in shul that will inform on you to the KGB. In the city of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, in the city of Dnepropetrovsk, there was a ritual slaughter, a shoichet named Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak once came to his house, and he was very, very upset. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak never looked upset, but he was very upset. And the Rebbe actually once said that the name Yitzchak means happiness, and Levi means to help. And his name is to help people with happiness. But here he was very, very upset. He was very, very down. Rabbi Yitzchak says, "What's wrong?" So Rabbi Yitzchak said that there's a guy in the shul who is an informer for the KGB, and every time he wants to inform on me, he comes to me and he asks me for money. So I always pay him off. I always bribe him. Shouldn't tell the KGB about whatever it is that he wants to tell the KGB. But this time he's asking me for a lot of money, and it's about my son. Who is Rabbi Yitzchak's son? Which son are we talking about? Our Rebbe. And what he wants to do is he wants to tell the government that my son's not in the army. Everyone at a certain age is supposed to join the army, and the Rebbe is not joining the army. So he wants to tell the KGB, how dare the Rebbe not join the army. And he told Rabbi Yitzchak, I'm going to tell the KGB about your son unless you pay me X amount of dollars, X amount of rubles. So Rabbi Yitzchak said, it's a huge amount of money. I don't know what to do. And if I give him money now, it's going to happen again. I don't know what to do. Yitzchak says, let me take care of this. He knew where to find the informer. What do you think you would find an informer for the KGB? In Shul. He walks over into him in the Shul. Rabbi Yitzchak, as I mentioned, was a slaughterer, and he was a slaughterer of cows. So he had in his jacket pocket, he had a chalaf. A chalaf is a huge knife used to slaughter cows. And he walks over to the informer, and he says, I'm about to do something that I'm going to sit in prison for my whole life for. And I'm going to do this happily because it's worth it to me to sit my whole life in prison as long as I know that I'm taking you with me. He takes his knife out of his pocket and he starts waving it. He says, what are you doing with Rabbi Yitzchak? He says, I'm not doing anything. He says, I'm telling you right now, if you ever walk to his home again, I know I'm going to go to prison my whole life. It doesn't matter. If you ever walk into the home of Rabbi Yitzchak again, I am taking you with me. I'm going, and he waves his knife, and the guy's like, stop, stop. And he never again bothered Rabbi Yitzchak. He never again. And Rabbi Yitzchak said to him that I want to thank you. I want to show my appreciation to you. And I promise you, he said to him, my appreciation to you will be in this world and in the next world. I'll never will forget this appreciation I have for you. Another story about Rabbi Yitzchak in the next world. Rabbi Yitzchak, one of the Hasidim that took care of the family of the Rebbe's father and mother, one of the Chassidim name was Rabbi Yosef Nemoitin. Rabbi Yosef Nemoitin was a very, very esteemed, prominent Chassid who really worked very hard to help the Rebbe's father and the Rebbe's mother. And after the Rebbe's father was arrested, he continued to help the Rebbe's mother, and he wanted to leave Russia though, and it was very hard to leave Russia because the Russian government wouldn't give people visas, wouldn't give them the papers to leave Russia. Whenever someone would ask to leave Russia, what happened? Well, if more often than not, way more often than not, they were denied. Not only they denied, but the Russian government would then punish the people for asking to leave Russia by taking away their jobs and taking away their bread cards. It was really horrible. If you tried to leave, you get into big trouble. But he kept on asking. He asked, and he would also, by the way, take care of the graveside of Rabbi Yitzchak. He would take all the weeds away. He would clean the place of Rabbi Yitzchak. And every so often he would wonder, how come the Rebbe doesn't visit? Of course, the Rebbe is the Rebbe, but the Rebbe should visit his father's grave. So that's what he wondered. Why doesn't the Rebbe visit his father's grave? So he had this question. I don't know the answer to the question. I know if it is a question. I mean, probably visiting Soviet Russia was a very dangerous thing to do, period. But that's the question that bothered him. Anyways, he wrote again and again to the Russian government asking them, please let me leave this place. And every single time he was refused. One year, in 1979, before Perestroika, before Gorbachev, the highest amount of people that left Soviet Russia was of Jews that left Soviet Russia was in 1979. He was already an older man. There's no rhyme and reason to the way the government decided who could leave and who couldn't leave. But they kept on refusing this guy, kept on refusing. And he just got back another mail from Ovir. Ovir was the agency in Russia that was assigned to give people visas, and it said denied once again. So he was really upset. It was 1982. And he goes to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He goes to Rabbi's father's grave in Almaty, and he says to Rabbi Yitzchak, father of the Rebbe, please give me a bracha. I should have a visa to leave Russia. And if you give me this bracha, I promise you, I will ask your son, how come he doesn't visit you? And he's so upset, and that's what he says. He leaves the gravesite, and he sees another man. The other man recognizes him. He says, Rabbi Yosef, you remember me? He didn't recognize him. What happened was that Rabbi Yosef would take care of this guy's blind father. This guy's father, the guy who he met in the graveyard, his father was blind. And Rabbi Yosef would take care of him. He would bring him to shul, bring him back from shul. He was very kind. And so this man was very appreciative. He says, you remember me, Rabbi Yosef? He says, oh, you were a child then. Yes, I was a child, but I remember how kind you were to my father. You always be nice to my father. So I see, he saw in his face was full of tears. He says, Rabbi Yosef, why are you so bothered? What's bothering you? So Rabbi Yosef said, I'm trying to leave Russia, and I can't leave. And they're not letting me go. And I keep on asking. He says, don't worry. I work for the government now. I work for the government, and I know exactly who needs to be bribed, who we need to give money to in order to get the papers. Give me 4,000 ruble tomorrow morning, and I will have you. I'll get you a visa. Okay. He gets him 4,000 ruble the very next day. Within a week, he has a visa to leave Russia. Okay. And he took with him some writings of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, and he went to the Rebbe. He came to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, when he came into the Rebbe's room, unusually the Rebbe stood up in his honor, which was not something the Rebbe did generally, but the Rebbe stood up for him, and he gave the Rebbe the writings of his father, and the Rebbe was, of course, very appreciative. And he asked the Rebbe if he could keep one of the pages as a memento of Rabbi Yitzchak. The Rebbe said he needs all the original writings of his father. And the Rebbe spoke to him of various things, and it was an audience which had a beginning and had an end. At the end of the audience, Rabbi Yosef starts walking backwards out of the Rebbe's room, as Hasidim would do when walking away from the Rebbe. They walk backwards. The Rebbe said to him, "But what about the promise you made to my father?" He didn't ask. Rabbi Yosef fainted on the spot. He literally fainted. He couldn't believe it. He had the answer. And the next Farbrengen, the Rebbe encouraged him and told him to say L'chaim. The Rebbe, I mean, he first I felt very bad about saying what he said saying what he said, but that's what he just said in his grief. And then 5 minutes later, he got the paper. So 5 minutes later, he met this guy, but he had planned to ask the Rebbe, but he's it was such a chutzpah, such an insolent thing to do. He decided last minute not to do it. But here you see how the Rebbe communicated with his father, even after his father's passing. You made a promise to my father. What about your promise? You promised to ask something. One more story. I want to share about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. There's so much to say, but one of the stories that the Rebbe repeated several times about his father was this. When the Rebbe's father was arrested, Rebbe Tzimcha, his wife, wrote in detail about the visit to his home and how the NKVD came at 3 o'clock in the morning, 8 days before Pesach, and they ransacked the home. And they worked for 3 hours, confiscating all the writings that he had and the writings of the letters of their Rashab. And they're there for 3 hours. And he asked if he could take matzah with him. They let him take 2 pounds of matzah, 2 kilograms of matzah with him. And where was this matzah from? So the Russian government knew the Jewish people wanted matzah for Passover. Even Jews who were not religious have matzah. And in those days, the Russian government gave everyone a bread card. And with this bread card, you can get 30 grams of black flour bread, but which was then considered inferior bread. Now it's considered healthier, whatever. And the government produced matzah, but Rabbi Yitzchak was very upset by the government producing matzah because it wasn't kosher for Passover. The government said it's kosher, but it wasn't kosher. So Rabbi Yitzchak arranged that 2 huge mills, should produce flour, and they should produce matzah. And it really bothered him. The government saying this is kosher Passover, it wasn't kosher. The government recognized that he was a prominent rabbi, and they wanted him to give a kosher stamp of his approval that the flour they're producing is kosher. But they added water to the flour. The reason they added water to the flour is because when they added water to flour, when you grind it, the volume is much bigger. It makes the bags, it fills up it makes the flour much bigger, and then you can sell more bags of flour. So government said we can't do what you're saying, because if we do what you're saying, then can not add water. If we add water, it will produce so much more bags of flour. You are stealing from the Russian government. I believe Yitzchak was adamant that it's not stealing from the Russian government. The contrary, it's being truthful, and the government wants us to be truthful. And they were very upset. And Rav Yitzchak said, "I will go to speak to Kalinin. I will go to speak to I'll go to Moscow. And he went to Moscow, and he prevailed upon the leaders of the Russian government that they have to. It's unbelievable. At a time when religion was being stamped out. And just to give you an example, in that year, 1939, when Rabbi Yitzchak made this tumult that they have to make kosher matzah, that year the government put out a questionnaire. They asked everyone to answer questions. One of the questions they asked said was, everyone should answer this question: do you believe in God? And Rabbi Yitzchak spoke publicly in his synagogue. It's a forbidden for a Jew to say he does not believe. A Jew has to express his faith in Hashem, and you have to say you believe. And Rabbi Yitzchak prevailed upon many people. In fact, there was one person who had a government position, and and his wife had written down making safer. We don't believe in God. And he went back to the government and said, I want my paper back. And he changed it and said, I want you to know that I do believe in God. So that year, 1939, was a year when there was a lot of, the government was really working hard to stamp out religion in general, especially Judaism. So Rabbi Yitzchak, he traveled to Moscow. He spoke to Kalinin, and he got them to agree to his standards, and he made 10 conditions that every bakery has to fulfill in order to have kosher Passover matzah. They have to use his supervisors. There were situations, the Rebbe Chana writes, that bakeries would call him before Shabbos. What time do we have to close? They would call him after, in Soviet Russia, where everything is forbidden. They said, "What time is Shabbos over?" You couldn't mention Shabbos in Soviet Russia. What time is Shabbos over? Can we bake the matzahs again? They asked these kind of questions. They called up Levi Yitzchak. There's this flour and water got mixed into it, and it took more than the amount of time. And it was 36 pounds of flour. What should we do with it? And Levi Yitzchak said, send it to a non-kosher bakery. But they were treating this with such respect. In fact, you couldn't get flour in Russia. You couldn't get flour. Even the highest government agents couldn't get more flour. You got your bread card and that was it. But for the matzah, they gave, Dnepropetrovsk was the center of the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. They gave the matzah bakeries so much bags of white flour for the Jewish people to have matzah for Passover. But unfortunately, that year, Rabbi Yitzchak was arrested. In fact, that the Purim before he was arrested shortly after Purim, 8 days before Pesach. People came to his house to celebrate Purim, and they did things that no one ever does in Soviet Russia. They danced together, danced till 6 o'clock in the morning, the night of Purim, till 6 o'clock in the morning, dancing and dancing. Rabbi Tzimchana said, perhaps they had some kind of insight, some kind of divine inspiration. We don't want to let go of Rabbi Levi. We want to be with her because right afterwards he was sent into prison and then into exile, which he unfortunately passed away prematurely, naturally, because of all the suffering that he had. So, anyways, his tremendous schus of Rabbi Yitzchak, which brings salvation upon the earth, and we just see the idea of integrity and truthfulness, and not to give up on any principles. One last thing about Rabbi Yitzchak: every other man who was arrested by the KGB, when they arrest him, they shave their beard. Rabbi Yitzchak said, "You're not going to touch my beard," and they. Fascinatingly, the NKVD, the K didn't touch his beard. Just shows you. I'm not saying it right? What did I say wrong? Oh. So this story of Levi Yitzchak highlights how a Jew in his devotion to Hashem, in any circumstance, brings salvation. In fact, the interrogator, when he was interrogating Levi Yitzchak, when he was in prison already, one of the questions they asked him was, how'd you pull off the matzah? So Yitzchak said, I went to Kalin and they offered him a bride. The interrogator was speechless. So a Jew has this power to bring out the deepest part of his neshama, to his integrity, his closeness to Hashem. And as Rebbe Rashab said, before the truth, everyone moves aside. I'm going to share with you one story about the Baal Shem Tov also. And this story also highlights how Hashem's salvation comes in the blink of an eye, and how a Jew's devotion to Hashem brings Hashem's salvation. This story is not a story that was shared by Chabad Rebbes, but it was printed by in the Treasure of Hasidic Tales by Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin. And though it's not from one of our Rebbes, I have another story that I'm going to share, which is a parallel story, parallel perhaps, and which makes me believe in the authenticity of this story as well. Story was like this: the Baal Shem Tov famously wanted to go move to Israel. He and his daughter Adl traveled to Israel, but there were different things that happened along the way. In heaven, he was prevented from getting to Israel, but he made it to Turkey. He made it to Istanbul. When he came to Istanbul, it was 2 days before Pesach, and he lost his power of divine inspiration. Baal Shem Tov had divine inspiration, of course, but when he came to Istanbul, he lost the divine inspiration. He was very upset. He went to the synagogue, tried to study Torah, but he couldn't connect the way he used to connect. He was very upset about this. It's the day before Pesach, and his daughter, Adl, Rebbetzin Adl, took the clothing of Baal Shem Tov to the beach to wash her father's clothing in honor of Pesach. They didn't have any provisions at all for Yom Tov. They had nothing. While she's washing the clothing of Baal Shem Tov, a ship arrives, and a man comes off the ship, and he doesn't know who the Baal Shem Tov is, doesn't know who Adl is, but he makes conversation with her, and he discovers they have no provisions for Pesach, and he tells them, "You're invited to come to join me for Pesach." And so it was right before Pesach, and there's not much to not allowed to eat many things before Pesach. You can't eat matzah because it's not Passover yet. You can't eat chametz because it's already after the time of prohibition. But you're allowed to drink wine. The Talmud says you drink a little bit of wine, it's an issue because when you drink a little bit of wine, it makes you satiated. Drink a lot of wine, then you're not. You'll make you. It will be a. It will trigger your appetite, and therefore you're allowed to drink a lot of wine. So Baal Shem Tov drank a lot of wine, and then he went to sleep before Pesach. And the host went to the synagogue. Shem Tov went to sleep, and when the host returned from from the from the synagogue, he told his daughter, Baal Shem Tov's daughter, "Go wake up your father. Time for the seder." She said, "I'm not waking my father. My father is my father. I'm not waking him up." Said, "Okay, I'll wake him up." He opens the door, and he saw the holiness of Baal Shem Tov's face, and his eyes protruding, and his face shining, and he didn't want to disturb Baal Shem Tov. But Baal Shem Tov came out shortly late afterwards, and he joined the seder. And Baal Shem Tov, it was obvious that he was again back to his normal self with inspiration. And the seder was celebrated, and in the middle of the seder, Baal Shem Tov called out the verse, "For he alone performs great wonders because his kindness is everlasting." That's what Baal Shem Tov said. Just the whole seder is quiet. He got to those words, he screamed them out. "For he alone performs wonders because his kindness is everlasting." That's what Baal Shem Tov said. The host was wondering about this, but he didn't really ask. And the next day, they went to the shul, and one member of the shul, a prominent member, was a wine merchant. He came late to the shul, and in honor of this wine merchant, the prayers were late a little bit. They used to wait. Apparently, he's a prominent member of the synagogue, and so they didn't start till he came. When he comes in, he says, "Mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. We have been saved." That's the story, and the Baal Shem Tov told his host that the salvation came at the moment he was saying, "Lo ois in the first days of Akilim Chaste." That's when the salvation came. So that's the story. Rabbi Zevin writes that is a tradition by Hasidim, and there's another story, another part of the story that was shared that perhaps explains that is the explanation of this story. In other words, there are two different sources of the story, and this part of the story was shared from one source. Another part of the story was shared from a different source. So what happens like this: the Sultan of Turkey was once traveling incognito. He wanted to see his people and not see them in the way that people would normally, show respect for the Sultan. He wanted to see them the way they were. So he traveled out as royal guards. He traveled incognito. But unfortunately, the Sultan, as he was traveling, although he was traveling incognito and people didn't know he was a sultan, but he happened to chance upon a group of bandits, and they took him and they kidnapped him, and they took all of his possessions. And he was hoping that they would release him, after taking his possessions, but instead they said, "We have to kill you because you're going to cause us to be arrested." They didn't know he was a sultan, and the sultan didn't think it was a good idea to tell them either that he was a sultan, because if he tells them that he's a sultan, then for sure they're going to kill him. Why would they kill him? Because for sure he has a power to punish them. So the sultan doesn't tell them he's a sultan, but he tells them, "I want to make you guys a proposition." He says, "I am a very gifted weaver. You bring me simple material, and I'll be able to make out of this simple material a very plush embroidered garment, embroidered cover, an embroidered cover." And they said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, bring it to me." And they brought him some material. He made an embroidered cover, and he told them the price of this. Told them exorbitant price. If people offer you less money, don't sell it. Only sell it for an exorbitant price. If someone's offering you less money, that means they don't get it. Only sell it for an exorbitant price. All right. So the messenger of the bandits goes to the marketplace. He brings this embroidered cover, and he tells people what he wants to sell it for, and everyone starts laughing at him. At one point, there was a whole group of merchants. They were all jeering at this guy. He's crazy. He wants to sell this shmata, this little piece of cloth for such a great amount of money. He's out of his mind. There's a Jew who was there, and the Jew is very curious. And the Jew says, "I want to buy this," and he buys it. He looks through this cover, and he notices that the first letter of the Sultan's name is embroidered in the cover. He thought that this is interesting, and he offered more money if they bring him another cover. And so the messenger of the bandits is very happy. He goes back to the bandits, and he gets the Sultan to make another embroidered cover, and he brings it back, and it has a second letter of the Sultan's name. And the same thing happens a third letter. And until after writing the whole Sultan's name, the Sultan then began putting into the covers the whereabouts, location of where he was. And this Jew reported this to the palace. He told the palace, the bodyguards of the Sultan, I was wondering about the whereabouts of the Sultan. And here was the first fruitful clue that they had. So they took the clue and they believed him. And they went to the place of the bandits and they surrounded them. And the warriors of the Sultan destroyed the bandits and they rescued the Sultan. The Sultan was so appreciative to this Jew that he gave the Jew a document. He offered the Jew a reward. The Jew said, if I was able to, by divine providence, he was able to save the Sultan, that for me is the biggest reward. Sultan says, no, I want to reward you. And he issues a document. The document says that whenever this Jew or his children or his grandchildren ever want to come to visit the palace, they have free right to visit the palace. Okay? This Jew lives his whole life, and the Sultan lives his whole life. And neither of them ever meet again because the Jew didn't need to see the Sultan. His life he didn't need to, and the Sultan didn't summon him again. But years later, the younger Sultan, the Sultan's son, is traveling with the Grand Vizier of Istanbul, and they see some Jews, and the Jews are putting together some matzahs in a wagon, and the Sultan was interested. He asked the Grand Vizier, "What's this?" So the Grand Vizier says, "This is matzah. The Jewish people have this holiday, and they have this weird cracker they have for their holiday." Oh, interesting. The Grand Vizier was the deep, abhorrent anti-Semite, and he told the young Sultan, there's regular matzah, then there's another kind of matzah that the more pious Jews have, called shmura matzah. Shmura matzah is matzah that has the blood of a Muslim child. That's what he told the young Sultan. Sultan was enraged. What? How could they do this? He says, let's find out who does this. And they compiled an exhaustive list of anyone who had ordered shmura matzah. They got this list and they planned. The Sultan said, that they should kill all the Jews who ordered Shmona Matzah on the first day of the holiday. Every one of them should be rounded up and killed. So the night of Pesach, this wine merchant, the son of the wine merchant, is at home, and he falls asleep, and he sees his father in the dream, and his father says to him, "How can you sleep? The Jewish people are in danger." He wakes up and he thinks, dreams are just shavi da beru. Dreams are not. The Gemara says the dreams don't mean anything. Sometimes dreams have a hint of prophecy, but the Gemara also says that dreams are just falsehood. And he wants to go and start the Seder, but all of a sudden he's overtaken by sleep. And again he sees his father, and his father says to him, "You have to go now to the palace." He listens to his father, and he goes to the palace. When he comes to the palace, for the first time, he's using his rights to see the Sultan, but he realized the Sultan had probably already gone to sleep. And instead of seeing the Sultan, he decided, "I'll go see the widow of the previous Sultan. I'll speak to her. The Sultan already gone to sleep. I'll speak to her. Maybe she could tell her son." He tells the widow of the Sultan what had happened, and the widow promises that she will speak to her son about this. When she went to speak to her son, she was thinking, "This is me crazy. I don't want to tell my son this. I mean, the Jew had this dream. I make up a different story." Tells her son, "I had a dream. I had a dream that you're about to your father came to me in a dream and told me you're about to do something terrible. I wanted to tell you you should examine all your decisions because your father came to me in a dream and said you're about to do something very terrible, something evil you're about to do." So her son said, "I don't know what he might be referring to." And she said, "Could it perhaps be about the Jews?" He said, "Well, yes, it is. I am about to do something about the Jews, but you can't have any complaint about it. It's really a justified thing. The Jews are taking these Muslim children and slaughtering them, and they're using it for their ritual bread." So then the wife of the widow of the Sultan says, "Let me tell you the truth. The truth is that the Jew came to me, and this is what the Jew said. The Jew said his father came to him and told him that he should use his privilege to speak to you and tell you that you should investigate and tell. And there was one, and you tell the Sultan the following message. This is a message that what his father said to him was that he should tell the Sultan that Jews are not kidnapping any Muslim children and not slaughtering any Muslim children. And the proof for this is the one who is saying this, the Grand Vizier, actually is a Christian, and he's making all this up. And he's an imposter. He pretends to be a pious Muslim, but really he is a Christian. And if you search his home, you'll discover that he sleeps with the cross." That's what the father of this Jew said. So the Sultan agrees to send this man to search into the home of the vizier, and sure enough, they discover that he indeed is a Christian, and they were so angry at him they killed the vizier. So this wine merchant came the next day in the shul. He was the one who came to the shul the next morning in Istanbul and said, "Mazel tov, Hashem has saved us." So the moment when the salvation came was the moment Baal Shem Tov had said, his kindness, he alone performs wonders because kindness is everlasting. So I said before that there's a story that echoes this same story that happened many, many years later. My grandfather told me that he was by the previous Rebbe's Seder for the first time during World War II. And in the middle of the Seder, the same thing happened. Out of nowhere, the previous Rebbe screamed out. The whole Seder was quiet. He alone performs great wonders because his kindness is everlasting. And my grandfather was new to Chabad and new to Tzaddikim. He didn't know what this was about. So he looked at the guy next to him. The guy next to him says to him, "I promise you, news just happened. Something happened in the world just now. I promise you something happened just now." And sure enough, after the holiday discovered, that's the time when Yamach Shammai, when Hitler, whatever happened to him, exploded, bunker, whatever it was, whatever various rumors happened to him, it happened then. The previous Rebbe said, Healing performs wonders because kindness is everlasting. So the main thing is that we should see the wonders of Hashem, and Yeshua Hashem clarifying the salvation of Hashem comes in the blink of an eye, in fast the blink of an eye, especially today in the anniversary, the passing of Rabbi Yitzchak, the 80th anniversary of his passing. It brings salvations in a way that only Hashem could do, because He alone performs wonders. Because His kindness is everlasting, which Hashem should give us the merit to see this in our brothers and sisters in Israel, and all those who need a refuah shlema and Yeshua. And the main thing is we should see the refuah shlema for my dear friend Yisrael Shlema ben Risha, and all Yidden in the refuah shlema, Rachman ben Zalaycha, and we should see the coming of Mashiach Tzedekenu Karim Mamish. Akutavach, Afreilich Avach, Rabbi Yehuda, Afreilich Avach, Abba, Baruch, Beryl, Lake,